Every once in a while, an animated movie comes out that is impossible to ignore. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is one of those movies. It is without a doubt one of the best animated films that I've ever watched. And it seems like I'm not alone.
And the Oscar goes to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
The film won the 2019 Academy Award for Best Animated Feature Film. But what was it that made this movie so great? Let's break it down. So I would say there were two main aspects that made Into the Spider-Verse such an amazing film. First, a great story, and second, a unique, groundbreaking animation style. In this video, I'll talk about that second part. If you watched the film or even seen the trailer, you probably noticed something was different about this movie. The way it looks and feels is different from other animated films in recent years. It doesn't look like 3D animation, but it's also not really 2D as we know it. So what is it? If we look back to when the industry first made the transition from traditional 2D animation to 3D computer animation, the shift was very clear. It was obvious that Toy Story looked nothing like Lion King. The differences were visually apparent. Once the switch was made, the industry worked harder and harder to push the art form as much as possible, getting better and better renders, producing more realistic results. Films kept looking better each year, but there's only so far we can push it. At some point, all films just look amazing. The fidelity is incredible, and there seemed to be no limit to what we can now produce with computer animation. Then the question had to be asked, what's next? Now that we can make everything we can possibly dream of, where do we go from here? The people behind Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse found at least one answer to that question. That is, playing with people's expectations. At this point, we all know what to expect when we go to the movies to watch an animated film. Yes, Disney has its signature style, and Pixar is known for creating amazing worlds, and Illumination is still trying to go the other way with more edgy humor and cartoony characters. Japanese anime is also rather visually predictable, and Laika has mastered stop motion to the point where it almost looks like CG. Honestly, I got bored of animated films lately. Sometimes I feel like I watch them because I have to. Like I need to be on what's new so I don't get left out of the conversation. It became more of a chore, one that I don't particularly enjoy anymore. It might be that I got older, but it also might be because most animated films just feel the same. But from the first minute I sat in the theater to watch Into the Spider-Verse, I knew I was watching something different. I felt something I haven't felt in a very long time, watching something new. The film kept playing with my expectations. I found myself staring at the screen trying to figure out how they did this or that. I fought the urge to pull out my phone and start taking notes on all the things they did different. I bounced between trying to analyze what I see to forcing myself to just sit back and enjoy the experience. Was it 2D or 3D? Who the hell cares? It broke all of my expectations and felt almost like a new genre of animation, like a new D. Of course, just to be clear, it's not a new D, it's 3D animation, but we'll get to that in a minute. If we want to innovate with animation, it's up to us to come up with visual ideas that challenge our viewers in new ways. Go right when everybody goes left. It's not about making the art form more sophisticated, it's about using it in new and creative ways. That is what the people behind this film did. And now, because you did click on this video for the question posed in the title, let's talk about the technical things that movie did different from a professional point of view, and break down the whole 2D, 3D thing. As I mentioned before, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a 3D animated film, not 2D. By that I mean that the majority of what you see on screen was created with 3D models in a 3D program, and not by drawing the frames in the traditional 2D animation way. They used 3D models and rigs for the characters and backgrounds in this movie. However, there were a few innovations they came up with to make it look different, mostly by adding 2D elements to the 3D assets. They added line work to the character's face using 3D geometry to give the artist more freedom in creating expressive poses. They also occasionally paused the film and overlaid the shot with 2D illustrations of that one frame, as a reminder that we're actually inside of a comic book. They pushed that idea even further by adding typography into the scenes, like cell phone rings, car screeches, and even some narration. The team also painted over most of the frames and often used abstract backgrounds that resembled commercial motion graphics. In addition to creating specific tools for producing a 2D feel to the movie, the creators also made some very specific decisions for certain aspects of the art style. These decisions played an important part in challenging our expectations. I broke them down to frame rate, motion blur, and depth of field. So one of the most visually apparent creative decisions in this film concerns the frame rate of the animation. 3D animated films are usually created in 24 frames per second, and this film is no different. However, the creators did something really interesting with the animation of the characters themselves, often reducing the character animation to 12 frames per second, also known as animating on twos. Animating on twos is usually done in 2D animation, stop motion, and anime. This means there is one new drawing every 2 frames. When 3D animation came along, the animation was done on ones, meaning every frame within the 24 frames per second is changing. Into the Spider-Verse still played on 24 frames per second, but the characters were often animated on 12 frames per second, while the camera movement and backgrounds were still moving on ones. That pushed the 2D feeling even further, and was one of the main elements that gave the film its now signature style. Another major decision was to not use motion blur in its traditional sense. If you're not familiar with motion blur, it's that blurriness that occurs when an object moves really fast on screen. That blurriness is technically a defect seen in live action movies since forever, but when 2D animation came along, they had to recreate it because viewers were already used to seeing it and expected it. But since we're using a software, we can easily turn it off. This usually doesn't look so great as every frame is extremely sharp and crisp. Motion blur makes the motion feel smoother and softer. But the Spider-Verse people wanted to do it their way. They turned off motion blur and instead added quick drawings between fast motions to give the feeling of motion blur. It's a common trick in 2D animation where motion blur can't exist organically. They sometimes added broken body parts which they duplicated to create that motion illusion. Comic book uses a similar technique. This decision allowed the artists to have even more control on how each shot looks, and again pushed that 2D hand-drawn comic book style even further. Lastly, the creators did something pretty interesting with depth of field. Depth of field is the blurriness of objects that are not in focus. Usually the main object in each shot is in focus, while the background and foreground objects are more blurry. In Spider-Verse though, in many cases when an object isn't in focus, it starts splitting up into its RGB colors, similar to a phenomenon called chromatic aberration, in which objects on the edges of the frame start leaking their RGB colors. This feature isn't just unique, but it also pushes the comic book feel, since printed comic books often had color misaligning during printing, which causes some colors to be offset. Even when it's almost unnoticeable, this decision adds to the overall comic book look they've built. And now we have to ask ourselves, does any of this matter? Well, yes and no. It matters because the studio has created a visual masterpiece that challenged us as the viewers in new ways. That is no small task and not one to take for granted. And yet, it wouldn't have mattered if the story itself wasn't so solid. If any of the story elements such as acting, plot, pacing, and humor didn't work so well together, all of this visual extravaganza wouldn't have mattered at all. Well done, Sony. Well done. And if you want to learn about how to make your own animated movie, we have a free ebook we created. You can download it on our website. It's called Making an Animated Short. And we also have a ton of amazing animation courses for beginners and experts, teaching some of the most popular animation programs like Maya, Animate CC, Toon Boom, and many others. And for comic book fans, we even created an amazing course on creating and publishing your own graphic novels. I'll put links to all of those in the description. Thanks for watching.